And I'd just like to share with you something that Geshe Tapke told us years ago. Often, as enthusiastic Dharma practitioners, we want to do Tantra right away. We want to do higher practices. We want to study emptiness. And he was actually saying to all of us, wait a minute, let's practice where we're at. And let's take some time looking at these 10 non-virtues that get all of us into trouble.
What if we are lying to save a life?
Let's look at the motivation. We live in a forest here. There's deer all over the place. And some hunter comes up and says, did you see a deer? And I would, in a moment, in a heartbeat, say, no, I haven't seen any deer around here. There's no deer around here. They haven't been here for years. So then I've told a lie, but with a really good motivation to protect that life. I will still need to purify that lie. And just to be clear with myself, I told a lie. I know why. I can purify this. It all boils down to motivation. Venerable Children reminded us just last night what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said when asked about what the essence of Buddhism is. And he replied with these words, to benefit or help others as much as possible and to avoid harming them. But it's hard to always know how to make this work in our life, how to avoid engaging in harm.
Friends, welcome to episode 45 of Vibe with Venerables, 1 hour of live Dharma and dialogue where you get to talk directly to a respected Venerable. I'm Meng, co-founder of Buddhism-dot-net, and your host. Today, our series on the 3 higher trainings continues with Venerable Thubten Samten. We are very lucky to have somebody of her seniority teaching us today. Venerable Santan first met Venerable Children all the way back in 1996. Yeah, back when even I was young. Yeah. and then that meeting inspired her to take on full-time practice and many months of retreat, and including 8 months in India and Nepal. And Venerable Santan was then ordained in 2010, and then she received a full ordination in 2012, becoming the 6th Bhikshuni at Sarasvati Abbey. So in today's class, we will continue to explore the higher training of ethical conduct. Last week, Venerable Lamsel taught us the 5 precepts, which she jokingly called, or she half-jokingly called, 5 ways to stop being a jerk. So today, Venerable Santan will explore with us the flip side of the equation. She will talk about the 10 non-virtues, which I'm jokingly going to call the 10 ways of being a jerk, except don't. With that, Venerable, can you start us off with a prayer?
Oh, yes, of course. And before that, I just want to apologize to everyone. I had some technical difficulties. I'm in my very boring office doing this call, so the background is not attractive with an altar in the background. So apologies for that, but at least we got it working just moments before we started the call. Okay, so here we go.
Venerable Santan is fine because over here we have an unattractive foreground, so we're all good now.
Okay, well, let's get ourselves into a meditation posture before we do the refuge and precept chant. And just take note of your torso. We want it to be upright and relaxed. You can lower your eyes slightly. And we will actually, I guess you'll have to open your eyes to do the refuge chant, which they're going to show you on the screen. So just to get our mind in the right direction, let's imagine in the space in front of us is Shakyamuni Buddha, surrounded by all holy beings. And surrounding us are all living beings in human form. And we can imagine leading them in going for refuge. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices I will attain. Sorry, my cat just bumped my computer. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, dear Venerable. Friends, before we begin, I'd like to invite all of you to go on Zoom chat and then answer this question. What is your learning intention for today? Be less of a jerk again. These are better people than me because I'm trying to be less of a jerk than even I am now. Okay, be enlightened, to become more helpful and aware as a human being. That's good. To keep learning, to be part of a like-minded community who rejoices and practicing the 5 precepts and 10 virtuous actions, to manage my affliction, to awaken, and to be calm in traffic. I know traffic and family gatherings. These are like the two greatest places where you can test your practice, and how to be more ethical. Yeah, thank you, my friends. Yeah, you can keep sharing them. And so, Venerable will talk for about 25, 30 minutes. And then as she's speaking, there's a Q&A board on Zoom. Anytime you have a question, please feel free to type a question in. Or if you want to, you can upvote an existing question. So with that, Venerable, can we invite you to begin?
Sure. Thank you very much, Meng.
Thank you.
Venerable Children has really nailed it when she says that, ethical conduct is all about not being a jerk. And, there's such a lot in the practice of ethical conduct to help us. And so last week with Venerable Lamsal, if you were here with us, you looked at the 5 precepts that one takes when you go for refuge and formally become a Buddhist. And so you looked at the precepts of not killing, not stealing, unwise and unkind sexual behavior, no lying, and no intoxicants. So because 4 of those are actually part of the 10 non-virtues, I won't spend as much time on those 4. I'll spend more time on the other 6. And I'd just like to share with you something that Geshe Tapke told us years ago when he came to the Abbey for the first time. And he was coming years ago to teach us on Aryadeva's 400, which is a very sophisticated text. And for a number of days, in a motivation that would take about an hour, he was telling us about the importance of hearing teachings on the 10 non-virtues and meditating on them and reflecting on them and discussing them. And basically what he was conveying to us is that, often as enthusiastic Dharma practitioners, we want to do Tantra right away. We want to do higher practices. We want to study emptiness. And he was actually saying to all of us, wait a minute. Let's practice where we're at. And let's take some time looking at these 10 non-virtues that get all of us into trouble. And then Venerable Children reminded us just last night about what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said when asked about what the essence of Buddhism is. And he replied with these words: to benefit or help others as much as possible and to avoid harming them. So that seems so straightforward. It seems like, yes, okay, that's not hard to figure out. But it's hard to always know how to make this work in our life, how to avoid engaging in harm. Because since beginningless time, I don't know about you, but I have been practicing the 10 non-virtues just out of my own ignorance. And so even though I'm not going to really talk much about killing, stealing, and unwise and unkind sexual behavior, I would like to start with a very sweet story. It's a true story from my experience about what happened to some person I observed when they're caught in the act of taking something that was not freely given. And so this story takes place many decades ago. I was working as a waitress in a beautiful mountain resort called Emerald Lake in Alberta, in Canada. And we would have busloads of people come in for lunch tours, and then we'd have certain busloads of people come in and stay overnight. And this one night when I was in the dining room, my friend and I were watching this one table, and these people, there's about 8 people at the table, they're all very well dressed, and they are very articulate and well spoken. And close to the end of the meal, my friend and I, who was waiting on the table, noticed this woman take a side plate. So this lodge was a historic lodge, and it had very nice china. We saw this woman take this side plate and put it into her bag. She just stole a plate from this lodge. And so rather than making a big fuss because the room was packed, my friend and I just decided that we wouldn't say a word. And instead, on their bill for the evening meal, we would include the cost of that side plate. So the bill was presented to the table. The man sitting beside the woman, I think it might have been his wife, looked at the bill. He looked at his wife. He called the waiter over and just gave him his credit card. Nothing was said. But you know, what's interesting is that I will never forget this story. Now, I don't know that woman. I never saw her again. But you know, she committed the act of stealing. And this woman didn't need to steal. And I'm sure my friend, who I haven't seen for years, he also would never forget this story. But you know, what we do and say impacts others. So I just thought I'd share that. It's a humorous story. And there's so many others. I think if you can look back to your teenage years, maybe you can find examples of taking things that weren't freely given. I don't know. But it's always good to start checking in our own life and not to think about, well, I remember when that other person I know did that. Let's look at our own mind and heart when we look at these 10. So I'm going to start with the 4 non-virtues of speech. Now, I know that you talked about lying last time, but lying is something that you may not think it's really easy to do, but actually, as you start looking into this non-virtue, it is really easy to do, because we may think that, oh, a little white lie, that's not really a lie. I mean, I'm concerned about the big lies, but even little white lies, even exaggeration. So lying in the Buddhist worldview is deliberately saying what we know not to be true. We know it's not true, and we can do that with our speech. But we also commit this non-virtue by typing in emails and texting and writing letters. We can do it with our gestures. We can do it when we don't respond. And Geshe Sopa, in his book, Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, can you see this book well enough? This is volume 2, and this deals exclusively with karma. And I'll be quoting from this book as I give the talk this evening. And he says that even in the case where, let's say someone is just really trying to be friendly to you, and they say, oh, you're such a bodhisattva. And if we don't say anything, or we smile, then you know what? We've just engaged in lying. I'll speak for myself. I'm not a bodhisattva. I'm not even close. Because the hallmark of becoming a bodhisattva is when you have a spontaneous realization of bodhicitta, and in that moment, after eons of practice, then we see all living beings with this heart and mind that is just so happy to see them. Doesn't matter what they say and do to us. So even by not responding or by nodding in recognition to that, compliment that maybe someone's trying to give, well, we've just engaged in lying. So just a cautionary note there. I'd like to tell you another example from my life of a time where I told a lie. And here's the situation. This is when I used to live in Alberta in Canada. I lived in the city of Edmonton. And I was going to a dinner party with a friend of mine who's always late. So actually, I told 2 lies that evening. Whenever I went with this friend to a dinner engagement, I'd tell him that the dinner was starting actually 30 minutes earlier than the actual time the dinner was going to start. And that way I knew that we might be there on time. So that was my first lie. I'd said, the dinner is at 5:30, actually it's at 6. So then we get in the car, and as usual, we're even late for this early time that I talked about. And we decided to take a shortcut. And on this shortcut, it's a gravel road. It's clearly marked, do not enter. It was just a utility road that connects to another road that we wanted to get on eventually. And no one's supposed to be on this road, but we decided we're late already again. We're going to take this road, and it's a gravel road. So we go whizzing down this gravel road, and then we turn a corner, and just ahead of us, where the road meets this main road, there's a police car. So my friend who's driving slams on the brakes, and the car goes into a skid, and eventually we're going sideways towards the police officer. And at that moment, I rolled down the window of the car. It was in the old days when you have roll down windows. And out the window of the car, I shouted, "Here, kitty, 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 kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." And so the officers turn around, and they're both like this. They've got their hands on their hips. And they gesture for us to come towards them and get out of the car. So I thought, oh, great. Not only were we late again for a dinner party, now maybe they're going to arrest us and put us in jail. So I didn't know what was going to happen. But anyway, as we got closer, we saw these two were just laughing like crazy. And when we got within earshot, they said, "Hey, that's the best story I've ever heard. You two get out of here and don't ever drive on this road again." So it was a lie. I didn't get arrested. I have purified those lies since that time. But the main thing is that when we lie, we also lose the trust of others. And it really has an impact again. Okay, it was a lie. I've tried my best to purify it, but it creates karma. But we're not going to get into karma tonight in this talk, because that's a topic for the future. We're going to take a look at ethical conduct. So that's lying. The next one is divisive speech. And the Buddhist definition of divisive speech is this direct, clear motivation to create division between people who are already getting along, they're harmonious, and it's this desire to make them unfriendly and to separate them. Or if they're already unfriendly, the motivation is to prevent them from reconciling and to make them even more unfriendly. So it's using our speech to sow discord between people. Now, this is a shocking non-virtue to think about. And initially we may think, well, I would never do such a thing. And then, it's good to sort of think more deeply about this. So I'll give you some examples that I've thought about in my experience, and examples that Venerable Thubten has brought to my mind in her teachings. So it might be the case where you say something critical to person A about person B. And then you turn around and you tell something to person B that's negative about person A. And just doing those two things, using our speech in a negative way, we're creating discord between people. It can happen in the workplace, for example, where maybe the feelings of jealousy have arisen in your mind towards a colleague, and you see that they're going for the same promotion that you're going for, and you're suspicious that maybe they're even more qualified than you. And so out of an afflicted mental state, you start telling people about their faults. You might even go to the boss and say, I don't really want to share this with you, but I think you should know this about this person. And it might be true. And actually, whether these things are true or not, our motivation to create discord and to make things difficult between people, to create friction, is what makes this the non-virtue of disharmonious speech. And we're doing all this out of the motivation of wanting that job and getting that promotion. And in the meantime, creating a lot of negative karma, telling things that are either true or not about this other person at the workplace. In other situations where we can sow discord, it may be that we're, getting together with our friends and we have had a difficult experience with another person that's mutually known in the group of friends. And so we tell our one friend about what's happened. And of course, because this is our friend, we really are expecting them to take our side, to understand that I've been treated horribly by this person. Don't you agree that they should not have said those things to me? And in doing that kind of thing, then again, we're sowing discord. The other person might have had no idea about the qualities of this other person, or that they would have the capacity to do what we said they've done to us. And again, it's this motivation that has prompted us to say unkind and divisive words about people to others and just keep people from either connecting or reconciling. So we have a policy here at the Abbey where if we're having a difficulty with someone, then we're guided to go to, a Dharma sister or a Dharma brother and say to them, I'm going to share my experience with you right now, but I don't want you to support me in my afflicted, angry mental state. I want you to hear my experience, and maybe you can help me see the situation in another way. So yes, we're telling the story. Maybe it is true that someone said really something very unkind to us or unskillful. That might be true. But instead we're asking for advice on how to manage our mind. And that's a very different motivation where we're asking for help, not just trying to, smear the other person. So that's the non-virtue of divisive speech. So the third one in this group of 4 with speech is called harsh speech. And again, this one is shocking to think about, easy to do. And in the Buddhist definition of harsh speech, it simply means using speech where our intention is to hurt someone with our words, by saying painful words. And so, as Geshe Sopa says, to make this a little bit more concise, the actual action is to criticize another person using hurtful and unpleasant language. Now, we could be talking about their race, their ancestry, their physical faults. That's not even an appropriate expression, actually. Their physical attributes, their ethical behavior, or their character. And interestingly enough, with this one, with harsh speech, whether the words are true or not doesn't matter. What matters is our intention to create, pain in the other person. That makes it harsh speech. So, of course, the mental state that sets us up for this particular one is getting angry. And I'm sure you've had the experience of getting angry in that mental state, and we all have the seeds of anger in our minds. So as Venerable Thubten says, we've got the seeds of anger in our mind. We're just, when the causes and conditions come together and we're not really on our game that day, then angry words are going to fly out. And so she says we should be especially aware of how we speak to people when we're upset. And even things like the example she gives is telling people who are very gullible and innocent, like children, and saying that, maybe we're fed up with their behavior, and maybe we say things like, well, if you don't get into bed soon, the boogeyman who's under your bed is going to come and get you. Now, that may sound humorous to other adults, But, to the little child who's already not probably doing so well, that's another example of harsh speech. We're making someone a little bit scared or maybe very scared. Another example of harsh speech is the use of sarcasm. Now, I used to think, because this is actually something that the family I come from is pretty good at, it was just normal. I thought everyone would expect hearing sarcastic words to be humorous. Or, you're with a good friend and you think, well, I know this friend really well. They know my sense of humor, and I can embark on this sarcastic comment. But, over time, as I've thought about this more, what is sarcasm? So I'll tell you one definition from the dictionary of what sarcasm is, and this really rings true in my experience, especially when I'm on the receiving end of sarcasm. And I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of sarcastic comments. So the dictionary version of this is a form of verbal irony in which someone says the opposite of what they mean, or they exaggerate something, usually in a mocking, cutting, or contemptuous way, in order to criticize, mock, or express contempt. Oh my gosh. I wish I had read this definition when I was about 9 years old. That's really shocking. And etymologically, what's very interesting is that this word comes from the Greek root sarcasm, and the meaning of that root word in Greek means to tear flesh. So that gives the sense of cutting, a biting quality to the words we use. So that's pretty shocking to think about, isn't it? When we've used sarcasm in the past, we think people are on the same page as we are, that they'll get it. And yet underlying these words of sarcasm, there is these other things going on. Something to watch out for. I'm going to quickly go through idle talk, which may be shocking to hear that this is a non-virtue. So again, it all boils down to motivation. Now, idle talk is typically talking about things that don't have a great deal of meaning, and you're wasting a lot of your time and the other person's time. You might be talking about sports, maybe the World Cup, your favorite hairdresser, the person you go to for massage, all kinds of topics that we can go through for a long time. And that is one form of idle talk, which maybe isn't so useful and falls into the category of a non-virtue. However, when we're trying to connect with a person, and maybe it's a person we're meeting for the first time, or when I go to visit my family, I'm going to talk about things, about topics that we can connect on. So we might be talking about the weather. We might be talking about the fact that my brother is going to the Toronto Argonauts game. I think that's the name, the Toronto Blue Jays game that's being played today in Toronto, in Canada. And so when the motivation is to connect, we can talk about golf. We can talk about, the political situation that's driving us all crazy. But just to watch out for the fact that even when the intention is to connect, if we continue talking long enough with these very, different kinds of topics, it can easily slide into the other kinds of non-virtuous speech. So just something to keep in mind as you're engaging in idle talk. But again, motivation. If it's to connect, then it's just fine. We want to find common ground, first of all. And once we've got common ground, then we can go off into maybe something more meaningful. The last three non-virtues are those of the mind. And I don't have as much time now to deal with these, but I'll see what I can do in the time I have left. And these are, we don't even have to say anything or do anything to create the non-virtue with these. And the first one is covetousness. So this happens when we wish to possess an object or even a person. And it all starts with noticing something with our eye consciousness. And then this feeling of craving arises. And then we think, wow, that's so beautiful. I'll show you a painted rock that a friend of ours paints. She paints these rocks. Can you see this? One of my favorite painted rocks. So you may see this, or I may see this on someone else's desk and may think, wow, that's so beautiful. I'd really like to have that rock. And then covetousness really goes in as I start planning on it. I wonder if how can I get this rock? Maybe I can see if there's a rock like this somewhere else. Maybe the next time this person comes, I can tell her how much I appreciate those rocks. And then I'm doing hinting, which for a monastic is a disaster, and that breaks a precept. So maybe it's you seeing a watch that you really like in a store, and you think about it over and over again, and you become obsessed with how can I get this watch? The worst case of covetousness is where you notice someone attractive. Maybe you're not in a relationship right now, but you're at the farmer's market getting some vegetables. You look across, your eyes meet. They smile at you, you smile back. And immediately you're planning, how can I connect with this person? And then maybe by chance you find out that they're already in a committed relationship, but you don't care. They smiled at you. And this mind of covetousness, you keep planning on how can I get that person to be with me? That probably is the worst example of covetousness and how the mind works. The second one that we do just by thinking is the non-virtue of malice or ill will. Again, this is shocking to think about, but this is the direct motivation, the desire to harm someone. And we're just thinking about it. So you want to hurt them, and you might want to hit them. I don't know. You might want to say hurtful words. You might want to physically assault them. You might want to do something worse. You might want to imprison them. And you wish them to have misfortune or get arrested or lose all of their fortune or who knows what. Now, believe me, this one is easy to do. I have to really watch myself when I'm thinking about certain political people in the world who are causing harm to others. And just for a moment, I might think, And then I think, wow, I can't even go there. That's the non-virtue of ill will. And instead, we take our mind to compassion. This person is making choices that's harming a lot of people. How unfortunate they're in such a suffering state that they're making those choices. That's one way of working with that mental state. The last one, how am I doing for timing, is the non-virtue of wrong views. And this one is, well, there's all kinds of wrong views that we can have as a non-Buddhist or a Buddhist. And this is just, we can have just harmful thoughts, and that's a wrong view. But specifically in Buddhism, the non-virtue of wrong views is having a nihilistic view, which means we think that what's real, or we think that something that is not real is real. And we think that karma, or we think that cause and effect doesn't exist. Or we think the noble truths are not true, they don't exist. Or that there's no such thing as samsara or rebirth. So wrong views in Buddhism is really this view that these basic tenets of Buddhism don't exist, and I don't even have to pay attention to them because they don't exist. And so it's this denial of cause and effect and karma and all of those things. So for example, if we insist on the wrong view that there's no cause and effect, and this relates to, the fact that karma, which is cause and effect, doesn't exist, then we give ourselves free agency to do whatever we want, because we think that there's going to be no consequence to our negative actions, our body, speech, and mind. And so we're setting ourselves up for tremendous suffering in this life and in future lives. And so to conclude, I'd like to share a quote with you from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of Venerable Chödrön's first teachers. in talking about ethical conduct in general. And he says, we talk a lot, all of us, about the wish for world peace, even now, with so many wars going on in the world, so many places of conflict. And we're making dedications for peace and, just wishing that solutions would come quickly to all of these conflicts. And then Lama Zopa says, and yet, if we look at our own lives and take a look at what we're doing, and make our own efforts to abandon even just one of these 10 non-virtues. If everyone on the planet for the next 5 minutes, if you can imagine, abandoned killing for the next 5 minutes, planet Earth would be safe for 5 minutes. And so if we think about these other non-virtues, then this is the way that we can create peace in our own world. Because you may think, well, I don't have as much influence as someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or Venerable Thubten children. But you know what? We have more influence than you even can imagine. And if you start thinking about it, we have a big influence on our friends. They're watching us. We have a big influence on our family members. And if you still are at work, we influence our work colleagues. We influence the people that we get together with in any kind of group that you're with. And when we're choosing to act ethically, people notice. And also acting ethically, it brings happiness to our heart and mind. And that is really something worth pursuing and thinking about. So I think I've reached my time and what I'd like to share in this so far. So, Meng,
Thank you,
can
dear
take the
Venerable.
next step.
Okay, thank you. Well, friends, I'd like to invite all of us to just take a moment to breathe and absorb the teaching we just received. And maybe just spend a moment just reflecting on what we just learned and how that relates to our lives. Thank you, friends. Okay, let's begin our discussion. So, Venerable, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked how you approach this topic. That the 10 virtues or the contemplation of 10 virtues are a good place to start, right? Because we start where we are,
Mm-hmm.
and so for me, the good news is when it comes to my own non-virtue, I have plenty of material to work with. But that's also the bad news. So my first question to you, dear Venerable, is what is next? So I look at my non-virtuous actions. There's so much of it, and for me, the immediate reaction is guilt and shame. And so, is that a skillful way to process it, or how do we do it? And what's next after this?
Sure. So first of all, the feeling of guilt, I think we're all familiar with. And that is not a helpful feeling at all. That just makes our situation mentally and in our heart more exacerbated. And so we want to view these situations, these mistakes we've made in the past, as simply mistakes. I have an ordinary mind. And what that means in Buddhism is I have not realized anything. I have not realized emptiness. And so as an ordinary being, in the past, and I still make mistakes, but in the past, I can look at that person and see what was shaping that earlier person to make those kinds of mistakes. I see, what was going on. I didn't have as many skills. Before I met Buddhism, I was just all over the map. I didn't have anything to rely on. And then I saw that most of the world was doing what I was doing. So what's the problem? And then in Buddhism, as we continue our studies and learning, then we learn how to purify our mistakes. And this is critical, Ming. So I'm glad you're asking this question. So there's many purification practices in Buddhism. And so we can take a look at a mistake we've made And we do this twice a day at the Abbey, where we do the 35 Buddha practice, prostrations to the 35 Buddhas. And I'll just talk you through quickly how we do this. So we bring to mind a mistake, like I'll use the one where I told a lie to the police officers. So I hold that in mind. I feel regret. So it had a funny outcome, but still, you know what? I let myself down. I told a lie. We weren't looking for a cat. We were speeding because we were late for dinner. And we went down a road that was clearly marked, do not enter. So I let myself down by telling a lie. So then in this particular practice I'm talking about, then I can do the practice of the prostrations to the 35 Buddhas. And then at the end of the practice, I can think about all this light coming in for the Buddhas, bringing purification. And then I can make a strong determination in my heart and mind about how long I can realistically refrain from engaging in this case, lying. So because it's so easy to do, but if you're more on this, you may say, okay, I'm going to do my best not to tell a lie to anybody for the next 24 hours, maybe a week. And then we close up the practice by dedicating the merit for this and thinking about emptiness, whatever we understand of emptiness and dependent arising. That's a very quick version of a purification practice that involves the 4 opponent powers. It's really important not to get caught in guilt, because then guilt we just collapse in on this very unhelpful state, and just recognizing, hey, I made a mistake. And just, to realize this is my situation with an ordinary mind. And to then, continue to forgive ourselves with that kind of mental state. Does that help?
It helps a lot. Besides what you talk about, the purification practice, which I think is very valuable, there's something else valuable that you mentioned, which moved me, which is this idea that you talk about, which is instead of, so if I look at myself earlier, doing this, doing that, and it's like my default reaction, this guy is such a jerk, is worthless. But instead of that, it's like, okay, this person who in the past didn't learn as much. And the past could be just 10 minutes ago. Didn't learn as much as I learn now, right? And what if it was another person? What if my friend? What if it was not me? I wouldn't have said, oh, you are such a jerk. I would say, I understand. Yes,
Yeah.
I feel you have compassion and I hope you get better. And I apply this same heart to this person who just happens to be me.
Right.
Yeah, and I
And we're
found
much
that,
harder,
very
we're
valuable.
much harder on ourselves. And you're
Yes.
right. When we see that in another person, we can say, oh, it's obvious they're having a really bad day. They're not in control of their mind right now.
Mhm.
How unfortunate they're going through this kind of suffering, even if they're saying something really nasty to us. They're just in a suffering state. But yes,
Mm.
to bring that and just realize, regret.
Mhm.
I made the mistake. Not guilt,
Mm.
but regret.
Mm.
We can have a sense of healthy shame.
Mhm.
Now, there's many kinds of shame, but the shame, again, that's sort of in the family of guilt, that's not
Yes.
helpful. But, recognizing, wow, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really not
Yes.
happy about that situation that I involved myself in.
It's beautiful. So the difference between healthy shame and unhealthy shame is whether there's compassion involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is
And then
a
the other
very
thing
good
I
place to
might
practice
mention,
self-compassion. Yes.
yeah.
Yes, madam.
And then the other thing is to look at, because all 10, it's kind of overwhelming to hear all these
Yes.
10 in like a
Yes.
30 or less minute talk, but to look at these 10 and say to ourselves right now, okay, which one of these 10 causes me the most problems right now in my life?
Mm.
And to really focus on that.
Mm.
And then
One at a
start
time.
expanding out when we get those more in control.
Mm. Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you, Venerable.
Mhm.
Michael, before I come to you, I'm going to ask a question online because this is a good one. The question is, what if we are lying to save a life?
Well, this one is asked a lot. And in this case, let's look at the motivation.
Mm.
So the example that Venerable Thubten gives with this particular one is, we live in a forest here, there's deer all over the place. And we might be off of our property, but we just saw a deer. We might be getting out to look at our car. And some hunter comes up and says, did you see a deer? And I would, in a moment, in a heartbeat, say, no, I haven't seen any deer around here. There's no deer around here. They haven't been here for years. So then I've told a lie, but
Mm-hmm.
with a really good motivation to protect that life.
Mm-hmm.
I will still need to purify that lie so that, it's not a huge one that's going to bring a really huge, nasty result, but just to recognize, the holy beings know what I just did, and just to be clear with myself. I told a lie. I know why. I can purify this.
So for those of us who don't do the formal purification practice, does it mean that what you just did is something that I can do? I can just tell the hunter, no, I didn't see a deer. Is it okay for me to do that?
Well, if your motivation is to save the life of that
Hmm.
deer,
Yes.
or whatever it is they're hunting, or you see something going on where it looks like there's danger, then yes,
Mm,
it
okay.
all boils down to motivation.
Mm, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Micah, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Venerable. My
Hi.
question is, how does one deal with prejudice when you experience it within yourself and when you are the subject of it?
Mhm.
Oh, that's a good question. This idea of having an equanimous mind without bias is a beautiful motivation that we all have, right? No one wants to be biased. And so, what I do, there's two things I do, Michael, because I'd love to think that I don't have bias. I do. And to recognize it in myself, first of all, and to work, in having a mind that's more equanimous. I'll give you an example. We had subcontractors working at the Abbey for, at least 3 years, maybe 4 years when we were building the Buddha Hall. And there were all kinds of different subcontractors, but there was one person in particular that I was really scared of. He was big, he had a big beard, and he kind of was scowling a lot. And my bias was, I'm afraid of this guy, and I'm not going to spend much time hanging around this guy because I'm scared of him. And in retrospect, thinking about that, I was judging him on an appearance. That my mind, I labeled him trouble. I labeled him a difficult person. I labeled him scary without knowing anything about this person. It's so embarrassing to admit this. But this is just one example. Interesting enough, and he was one of those, his job at the Abbey was putting in all of these ducts. And so he was working with his arms overhead. Oh my gosh, I don't know, 8 hours a day. He was really strong. And that's really, really brutal work. It's really hard work. So at the end of the job, I bumped into him and I tried to run away. I tried to find another route around bumping into him, and there was nowhere to go. So I had to come up to him and I said, "Thank you so much for helping us with the Buddha Hall." I said, "It must be very hard work doing the work that you do." And then he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Well, sure." He said, "What's in that little building down the road?" And I said, "You mean our old meditation hall?" He said, "I don't know what you call it." But he said, "It's a log cabin." So this is where we had our original meditation hall. It's still there. And so I said, "Would you like to see it?" And he said, "Yes." So I took him into the old meditation hall. It still was filled with tankas and statues. And I thought he'd just be sort of bored or maybe even having aversion. But he came in and he said, "Can you tell me about these things?" And so this person I was so afraid of was expressing interest in the Dharma. I saw a totally different side of him. And he was very gentle. And he was so touched by these images that were totally foreign to him. And then at the end of the visit, he said, "My mother died last year and she left me with a Buddha statue. Would you like to have it?" And I said, "We'd love to have it." So my view of this person that I labeled with all these things out of a biased mind was so shot to smithereens, with his experience. And so when I'm receiving, when I'm on the receiving end of people with bias, sometimes people will look at me and there's a scowl, sometimes, not all the time, but I can see they think, what's going on here? And so I just think, there's a person who just wants to be happy, just like I do. And they're being overwhelmed by projections that they can't control their mind. I'm not a familiar looking figure in the way I'm dressed and with my haircut. And that's okay. Because, if we have the chance to talk, we'll learn something very interesting about each other. And may we have the chance to talk in a way that's safe and without any kind of conflict. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Micah.
And if it doesn't, let me know, because, I'm just trying here.
So back when I was working in the corporate world, we all had to take a class. It was called unconscious biases. And I made a joke. I said, I don't need a class because I'm Buddhist. All my biases are conscious. I'm kidding. Okay, Joycelyn, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Venerable. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much. It was a very, very lovely talk, and it has helped me so much. Thank you. So you talk about even staying silent can be part of perpetuating a lie. So there are many situations whereby sometimes I'm hearing person A talking to me about his or her frustrations with person B. And I know that some of these are not entirely true, but I wasn't confident of saying something that will help to ease the situation. So I chose to keep quiet because I felt that whatever I say will only make situation worse. But but I know that is in some way it is also a lie, right? Because it's not true what A is saying about B. And I'm not making an attempt to correct it. Do you have any advice as to what are the other more skillful ways to handle or manage a situation? Thank you.
So one thing that comes to mind, again, courtesy of Venerable children, is that in this situation, you could probably say something like, I just have to let you know, that has never been my experience with person B. My experience with person B is that they're always showing up when I ask them to. They have a lot of creative ideas. I find that they're very attentive to my opinions when I express them. So you point out the good qualities of the person that you know for a fact are in that person. And then you might say, I wonder if you might consider that the view that you currently have of this person, maybe it's not the whole picture of who this person really is. And you might just say, I've never had that experience with this person. Is that something that you think that you might be able to try?
That question for me, the last question?
Yes. Yes.
I will have to experiment a bit.
Yeah, I know.
To see how much it will provoke a person A more.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like person is so angry with B that if I try to say anything that doesn't seem to agree with his or her views,
okay,
it just provoke he or
okay.
her even
That's
more.
the other element. Then the person is so the person's upset. So maybe you could say something like, well, you know what? I can see that right now you're very upset. And I'd really appreciate when you're feeling like you're in a calm state, if we might, have a conversation when you're calm. And I'd just like to share some of my experiences, or I'd like to share some thoughts about this with you when it's a better time for you. Maybe not even point out they're upset, because that can make sometimes people even more upset when people say, oh, you're upset. So you might just say, you know what, I'd love to spend some time with you when we can find some time, and I'd like to share with you my thoughts that I've had that may be of benefit, something like that, to sort of ease your way into getting there.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay.
And if you don't mind me adding just a tiny piece,
Yes.
because I live in the real world. I find myself in the situation. So I think in everything Venerable say, I agree. And one tiny piece, during the situation when the person is angry and talking about the other person, what I would do is I say, I hear you.
Yes.
I hear you means it doesn't mean I agree with you. Doesn't mean I
Yes.
disagree, but I do hear you. And that person just want to be heard at the moment.
Great.
So I say, I hear
Thank
you.
you.
And then, yeah. And
Really
then
good.
later on, I say, yesterday you said that thing. Yeah. I can tell you where I disagree. But that's the next day. But at the moment is, I hear you.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we still have questions, but we have time for one last question from Carolyn. Carolyn, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Venerable Samten.
Hi, Carolyn.
I have another question about divisive speech because I hadn't really thought about it before as much as how much I might partake in it. And my question is any time that two questions, if you could repeat what you said, where you said something about I'm going to share my experience, but I don't want you to agree with me, my story, you want another perspective. If I got all of that down. But anytime we're complaining about another, or anytime, is it always divisive speech? Because I know that can be motivated by hurt, but
Yeah, I would say if we're complaining about other people, regardless of, if it's
Yes.
true or not, we're complaining and we're trying to get another person to agree with us, right? Look what this person said to me. It's so mean. It might have been mean. But instead, what we can do is you can say, you know what? These words were said to me. You might even repeat the words that were said. I feel hurt. I feel disrespected, whatever else. And then we can say, you know what? I'm having all these reactions, but I'm also in an afflicted state right now. I'm pretty upset about this. Can you help me view this situation in another way where I can, get myself together, or I can have another view of what happened? Something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really good to have good Dharma friends who are not going to take your side and support the crazy states we get ourselves into. Really good to have good friends.
Yes, true. Thank you. Thank you, friends. I think that's all we have time for today. Venerable, can we invite you to close with the dedication?
Oh, sure. Well, let's sit comfortably just for a moment. And we've heard a lot. We've shared a lot in the last few minutes. We've created a lot of virtue. And so to rejoice that on this busy time in our lives, we set aside some time to explore these Dharma topics with the motivation of becoming kinder and wiser people. And to protect all this merit we've created, we'll do the dedication of merit. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you. Thank you. My friends, please all bow to our teacher.
Dharma friend. Dharma friend, not teacher.
Oh, you're so modest.
No.
My friend and my teacher. Thank you, dear Venerable. Friends, as a reminder, this recording will be uploaded onto the Buddhism.net YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. It helps us a lot, and tell all your friends. And if you'd like to show your appreciation and gratitude to our teacher and Dharma friend today, Venerable Samten, you may make a donation to Sarvasti Abbey. So we will share the link by chat and by email. Now, who do we have next week? You may think that next week, after Venerable Samten, we have Venerable Psalm 11. But you'll be wrong. Next week, our teacher will be Venerable Mondam, who will wrap up the higher training of ethical conduct. So don't miss that. By the way, Angela threatened to edit out all my jokes about Venerable Psalm 11, which is why you should always come to the live show, because you got to hear my jokes before Angela edit them out. Also next week, we're going to have an after vibe session where we come together for pure Dharma sharing, and you'll be led by Venerable Samten herself. Yay! So friends, those of you who haven't gotten enough of Venerable Samten today, please sign up. You can get extra vibe with Venerable from her next week. And the sign up link will be shared with you by email. With that, my dear friends, we'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody.